Welcome back to the channel. If you're here late at night looking for a story to drift off to, you're in the right place. Before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. I'm also curious, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now settle in, get comfortable, let the world slow down.
In the small South Australian town of Kapunda, life usually moved at a gentle pace. With a population of just around 3,000, the community was close-knit, familiar, and quiet. Everyone knew everyone else, and crime was almost unheard of. But in the fall of 2010, that calm was shattered in a way no one could have predicted. At the center of the tragedy was the Rowe family, Andrew, Rose, and their teenage daughter, Chantel. Andrew Rowe, born in England in 1965, moved with his parents to Australia at the age of 3. They settled in Adelaide, where Andrew grew up surrounded by quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and a childhood filled with simple pleasures: school, laughter, and weekends fishing with his father. Known for his easygoing nature, Andrew earned the respect and friendship of those around him. He married Rose, a vivacious and warm woman just a year younger than him. Their love story was humble but genuine, blossoming while Andrew studied in Adelaide. By 1985, they were married in an intimate ceremony attended by close family and friends. 2 children completed the Rowe family. Christopher, born in 1987, grew into a responsible and steady young man. By 2010, he had moved out, living nearby with his fiancée. Chantel, born in 1994, was 16 at the time of her death. She was smart, lively, and determined, balancing school with part-time work at a local cafe. Life for the Rowe family seemed ordinary, peaceful, and filled with love. Andrew and Rose ran a successful carpet cleaning business, giving them both financial stability and a sense of accomplishment. The family's life in Kapunda was quiet but fulfilling. They were respected in the community, admired by neighbors, and known for their generosity. Despite the town's serenity, beneath the surface, life was not without challenges. Chantel, in particular, faced a major turning point that year. She discovered she was pregnant, a revelation that brought both anxiety and responsibility. But she was determined to navigate her teen pregnancy with the support of her boyfriend Dylan, her family, and friends. Everything seemed normal as November approached, but the evening of November 7th, 2010, marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Kapunda for years. It was a cold night, the kind that blanketed the town in silence. Inside the Rowe family home, there was nothing to suggest the horror that was about to unfold. No intruder alarms, no unusual sounds, just the quiet comfort of family life. And yet, in the early hours of the morning, an unknown figure entered the house, bringing with them an unimaginable violence. The perpetrator had a chilling precision. Using a small bathroom window, he slipped inside quietly, waiting silently for the household to settle into sleep. For over half an hour he remained hidden, listening, observing, planning. Then the attack began. Chantel, already ill and resting in her bedroom, became the first target. She resisted, tried to hide, but the killer was relentless. In moments, the scene erupted into a violent struggle, screams tearing through the silent night. Andrew and Rose, roused by their daughter's cries, attempted to intervene, but the killer, the teenage boy who seemed so harmless in the daylight, moved with terrifying force. Andrew was struck multiple times. Rose fought to save her daughter, but the brutality was overwhelming. In the end, all 3 members of the family were murdered in their own home. The scene left even experienced investigators horrified, blood covering the walls, floor, and furniture, signs of struggle everywhere, and a calculated attempt to remove evidence, though some traces, footprints, DNA, and fingerprints, remained. When neighbors noticed a strange stillness in the row home 2 days later, the reality of the crime came to light. The discovery of the bodies shocked Kapunda to its core. The town had never witnessed such savagery. Andrew, Rose, and Chantel were gone, and the community was left grappling with grief, anger, and disbelief. The youngest of the family, Chantel, had been sexually assaulted before her death, a detail that intensified the horror of the case and marked it as deeply personal and twisted. Initially, suspicion briefly fell on Jason, the eldest son, but he was quickly ruled out. He had been on vacation in Queensland at the time, with his alibi corroborated by multiple witnesses. The police knew that the killer had to be someone capable of overpowering 3 people in a short period. Early theories suggested a physically strong intruder, perhaps a stranger, but nothing about the Rowe family suggested a robbery motive. Valuables had been left untouched. Phones, laptops, cash, and even expensive camera equipment were left in plain sight. Investigators were forced to consider a more disturbing possibility. The killer was someone the family knew and trusted, someone capable of entering the home without resistance. Forensic evidence pointed to an impulsive but meticulously violent act. The murderer had taken kitchen knives from the family's own supplies, suggesting the act may not have been premeditated, but had escalated in a horrifying frenzy once inside. Yet the precision of the cleanup and removal of the knives hinted at a calculating mind behind the chaos. Neighbors provided little information. No one had seen or heard strangers in the area. One neighbor recalled hearing Rose scream around 1 a.m., followed by a loud thud, but thought it was a domestic dispute and did not call authorities. This small hesitation meant precious time was lost, and by the time police arrived, the crime scene was already tragic beyond comprehension. For the investigators, the combination of personal motives, extreme violence, and lack of robbery motive led them down a chilling path of inquiry. Dylan, Chantel's boyfriend, emerged as a key source of information. Though devastated, he recalled that Chantel had called in sick from work the day of the murders. By the morning, Dylan's text message to her had been read, but not by her. Police deduced that the killer had interacted with her phone, attempting to cover tracks and manipulate perceptions. The revelation added to the sense of premeditation behind an otherwise impulsive-looking act. As investigators turned their attention to Chantel's social circle, one name began to emerge: Jason Downey, a 17-year-old boy known to Dylan and peripherally to Chantel. Initially, Jason seemed harmless. He was slender, unassuming, and did not appear capable of such brutality. However, interviews revealed inconsistencies. He volunteered details unnecessarily, became nervous, and exhibited erratic behavior. Fingerprints and DNA were taken, and the results would soon shock investigators. Within days, forensic experts confirmed what no one wanted to believe. Jason Downey's DNA and fingerprints matched evidence collected at the scene. The boy, appearing normal and harmless by day, had committed a crime of unimaginable violence. His slender frame had masked the intensity of his rage, jealousy, and obsession. The evidence also revealed the depths of premeditation. Jason had hidden inside the house, timed his attacks, and attempted to manipulate perceptions after the murders. This revelation stunned the town. The killer was not a stranger, not a physically imposing man, but a teenage boy whose obsession and rejection-fueled rage had escalated into the worst imaginable outcome. The Rao family's tragedy highlighted the cruel reality that appearances could be deceiving, that evil could lurk even in the most familiar and seemingly benign places.
For the police, the case became both a race for justice and a grim lesson in the complexities of human behavior. By the time investigators pieced together the sequence of events, it was clear that Jason Downey had acted out of obsession, jealousy, and rage. Chantel's rejection, her pregnancy with Dylan, and the closeness of her family were triggers that transformed unrequited feelings into monstrous violence. And yet, the meticulous nature of the attack, the movement through the house, the selection of weapons, and the partial cleanup revealed a mind capable of planning and controlling chaos, even in the heat of emotion. Kapunda, a town that had never known such a brutal crime, was left to mourn. The Rao family's neighbors, friends, and community members struggled to comprehend the horror. For Christopher, the surviving son, the loss was unimaginable. He had returned home only to discover that the people he loved most were gone, taken by someone he had seen as just another teenager in their circle. The shock, grief, and anger would shape the path forward, as both the family and the town sought answers, accountability, and a semblance of justice. The murders having been committed, the town in shock, and the killer still at large, yet soon to be identified by the painstaking work of forensic investigation and careful police work. The second part will explore the investigation, the unraveling of Jason Downey's deception, and the process that led to his eventual arrest and the shocking details of his actions inside the Rao home. The morning after the Rao family was discovered, Kapunda felt suspended in a fog of disbelief and fear. For a town that prided itself on safety and neighborliness, the events inside the Rao's home were incomprehensible. Police from Adelaide, experienced in serious crime but rarely facing such savagery in small towns, arrived to comb the scene. What they found was a scene of chaos and horror that would remain etched in their memories for years. Bloodstains on the walls, floors, and furniture testified to the violence of the attack. Each victim had suffered dozens of stab wounds. Andrew, with 29, Rose, over 50, and Chantel, 33. And yet, the brutality was only part of the story. Forensic experts began piecing together details. They noted that the killer had used knives from the kitchen, suggesting that the attack had been at least partly impulsive. Yet other signs contradicted that assumption. Footprints had been partially wiped clean, indicating an effort to cover tracks. Drag marks near Chantel's bedroom suggested she had struggled to escape, but the killer had overpowered her, pulling her from hiding and leaving her to face the brutal attack. Nothing had been stolen, eliminating robbery as a motive. The meticulous yet frenzied nature of the attack hinted at someone with both rage and a disturbing level of planning. The first challenge for investigators was identifying the killer. With Christopher ruled out due to his verified alibi in Queensland, the police had to consider other possibilities. A stranger, someone the family knew, or someone from the surrounding community. Dylan, Chantel's boyfriend, was questioned immediately. Devastated by grief, he explained the details of the night leading up to the murders, including that Chantel had called in sick from work and had seemed slightly unwell. Her last text to Dylan had been read, but Dylan was unaware that it had been intercepted by the killer, a detail that police would later find chilling. Police began scrutinizing Chantel's social circle. Friends and acquaintances were interviewed, and early suspicions focused on people who might have harbored resentment, jealousy, or personal grievances. It was during this stage that Jason Downey emerged as a person of interest. 17, seemingly unremarkable in appearance, thin, nondescript, and socially awkward, Jason had been friends with Dylan and known to Chantel only casually. At first, investigators found no apparent reason to suspect him, but when questioned, Jason's behavior drew attention. He volunteered details unnecessarily, spoke defensively, and seemed unusually anxious despite his otherwise calm exterior.
A breakthrough came when forensic teams analyzed fingerprints and DNA from the crime scene. Jason's fingerprints were discovered on Chantel's bedroom door, and DNA collected from her body matched his profile. It was a shocking revelation. The killer was not a stranger, not a physically imposing man, but a teenage boy who had hidden in plain sight. The evidence painted a grim picture of obsession, jealousy, and a desire to control that had escalated into murder. Investigators learned that Jason had entered the Rao home through the small bathroom window, a point of entry not noticed by neighbors, and had remained hidden inside, observing the household's movements before carrying out the attack. Interviews with Jason revealed a chilling, calculated mindset. Though he initially claimed he had visited the house weeks earlier, forensic timing proved otherwise. His DNA on Chantel's body could not have remained from an earlier encounter. The evidence demonstrated that the crime occurred on November 7th. When questioned about the murder weapons, Jason claimed ignorance, but additional evidence, including blood-stained shoes and traces of his sweat, linked him directly to the scene. The shoes had been discarded in a deserted area, a small but telling attempt to remove incriminating evidence. The police reconstructed the timeline of that night in terrifying detail. After a conflict at home with his own family, Jason reportedly slept in his car, then learned that Chantel was homesick. Obsession and jealousy had already been simmering beneath the surface, but this knowledge ignited a violent fury. He parked out of sight, approached the Rao home, and entered through the bathroom window. Once inside, he waited, listening to the household settle. His initial claim that he intended to confess his feelings was contradicted by the presence of knives in his hands and the calculated way he moved through the house. The attack on Chantel was personal and brutal. Her resistance triggered a violent rage that escalated when Andrew and Rose intervened. Andrew attempted to protect his daughter. Rose tried to fight off the intruder, but neither stood a chance against the violence of a mind driven by obsession and jealousy. The forensic evidence made it clear that the attack was sustained and focused, with over 100 stab wounds distributed among the 3 victims. Experts concluded that despite his small frame, Jason was deliberate in his movements, controlling the chaos while ensuring total domination over the victims. As the investigation continued, detectives uncovered disturbing details about Jason's psychology. He had been rejected multiple times by Chantel, and her pregnancy with Dylan apparently had triggered an obsessive jealousy that had been festering for months. This obsession was not fleeting. It had been carefully nurtured, internalized, and then explosively acted upon. Unlike random acts of violence, this was deeply personal. Jason's actions demonstrated not only uncontrolled rage, but also a premeditation masked within an impulsive-looking attack. Additional evidence solidified the case. Police discovered that Jason had attempted to manipulate perceptions post-murder, including interacting with Chantel's phone to give the impression she might still be alive. He had changed clothes to remove bloodstains and partially cleaned the scene. These actions demonstrated a disturbing awareness of right and wrong and a deliberate effort to evade accountability. Experts noted that this combination of rage and cunning made Jason one of the most unsettling perpetrators they had encountered. As the community grappled with the implications, the scale of the crime became even clearer. For a quiet town like Kapunda, the realization that a local teenager could commit such savagery was terrifying. Parents feared for the safety of their children. Friends questioned how someone they knew could be capable of such evil, and the police struggled to comprehend the duality of Jason's demeanor, one of a seemingly ordinary teenager in public and a violent killer in private. During interrogations, Jason displayed a chilling calmness. He denied any wrongdoing initially, attempting to explain his fingerprints and DNA with implausible stories. But the forensic evidence was indisputable. Each lie he told fell apart under scrutiny, reinforcing the narrative that Jason had acted with both planning and intent. His story of a simple argument escalating into violence did not hold against the overwhelming evidence that pointed to obsession, meticulous preparation, and an intent to kill. The investigation also highlighted failures in early detection. Neighbors had heard Rose's screams but dismissed them as a domestic dispute. A text message from Dylan had been read but went unanswered due to Chantel's phone being out of credit. Small, missed opportunities allowed Jason to complete his attack without interruption. These details added a grim layer to the investigation, underscoring how quickly and easily a life could be destroyed when opportunity met obsession. In the weeks following the murders, Jason was held in custody as investigators built a rock-solid case. He continued to exhibit signs of detachment, refusing to show remorse, and occasionally making comments that unnerved officers. Psychologists later described him as calculating, emotionally detached, and capable of compartmentalizing his actions in ways that masked the severity of his guilt. The police also began mapping Jason's interactions leading up to the murders. Friends and acquaintances confirmed he had displayed jealousy towards Dylan and obsessive behaviors regarding Chantel. He had been polite to Chantel, but had taken rejection poorly. What may have seemed like typical teenage jealousy had escalated into a homicidal obsession. These findings helped investigators understand not just the how of the murders, but the why, revealing a disturbing intersection of adolescent emotion, obsession, and unchecked rage. With the forensic evidence and psychological profile established, prosecutors prepared to charge Jason with 3 counts of murder. The case against him was overwhelming. Fingerprints, DNA, blood-stained clothing, discarded shoes, and multiple witness statements painted a complete picture of guilt. The next step would be the courtroom, where Jason's motives, methods, and the full horror of his actions would be laid bare. Kapunda, meanwhile, struggled to process the reality of the crime. The town had lost a beloved family, and the events challenged the community's sense of safety. Friends and neighbors mourned publicly and privately, grappling with the understanding that evil could lurk closer than anyone could imagine. The Rowe family, once symbols of normalcy and warmth, had become tragic figures whose story would echo for decades. Jason Downey's identity as the killer is fully revealed, the meticulous nature of the crime reconstructed, and the town and authorities prepared to confront the courtroom drama that would follow. The final part of this story will explore the trial, Jason's behavior during proceedings, the sentencing, and the aftermath for both the town of Kapunda and the surviving Rowe family members who must rebuild their lives from an unimaginable loss. By the time the trial of Jason Downey began in the fall of 2011, the town of Kapunda was still reeling. The Rowe family murders had left a permanent scar on the community, and public interest in the proceedings was intense. Courtroom observers filled every available seat, while journalists and television crews covered every development. For the prosecution, the evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, DNA, blood-stained clothing, discarded shoes, and witness testimonies painted a clear and damning picture of premeditated, obsessive violence. For the defense, the challenge was monumental. Jason, 17 at the time, appeared in court calm and composed, showing little outward emotion. His demeanor was unnerving, especially to the families of the victims and to seasoned court officials. He offered occasional answers to questions, but often provided minimal responses, leaving an impression of detachment. Psychologists who had examined him described him as emotionally shallow, with a capacity to compartmentalize actions and minimize empathy. His calmness during the trial, combined with the horrific nature of the crimes, made him one of the most chilling defendants any observer had seen in years. The prosecution methodically recounted the events of November 7, 2010. They presented detailed timelines based on phone records, witness statements, and forensic data. The narrative was relentless. Jason had parked his car out of sight, entered the row home through the bathroom window, observed the family for approximately 30 minutes, then attacked Chantel first, followed by her parents. Forensic experts detailed the evidence collected from the scene, emphasizing that the attack was violent, prolonged, and deliberate. The sheer number of stab wounds, over 100 combined, was highlighted to underscore the brutality and intensity of the murders. A particularly harrowing portion of the trial involved testimony about the assault on Chantel. Medical examiners explained how the sequence of injuries showed she had tried to escape, revealing the horror of the attack. Witnesses recounted the screams they had heard during the night, clarifying that the neighbors had misjudged them as domestic noises rather than calls for help. The prosecution stressed the intimate and personal nature of the violence, showing how Jason's actions were driven by obsession and rejection rather than random chance. This emphasis painted the killings not just as impulsive acts, but as the culmination of months of obsessive fixation. The defense attempted to argue that Jason's mental state at the time could have contributed to impulsive behavior. They suggested that his youth, emotional immaturity, and obsession with Chantel may have temporarily impaired his judgment. However, forensic and psychological evidence undercut these claims. Investigators and experts had found signs of careful planning, changing clothes after the attack, attempting to partially clean the crime scene, and manipulating Chantel's phone to create a false impression she was still alive. These actions demonstrated that Jason was aware of his actions and their consequences, contradicting the defense's narrative of an uncontrolled, impulsive outburst. Throughout the trial, Jason maintained an eerie composure. He occasionally offered minimal acknowledgments of the evidence, but denied personal responsibility in a manner that suggested either deep denial or a calculated attempt to minimize his apparent culpability. Prosecutors noted that he had initially fabricated stories to explain his fingerprints and DNA at the scene, attempting to mislead investigators. His calm and indifferent demeanor shocked even veteran law enforcement officials who had expected a defendant of his age to show at least some fear or remorse. During closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized the human cost of the crime. Andrew, Rose, and Chantel Rowe were described not merely as victims, but as vibrant individuals whose lives were violently stolen. The prosecutors highlighted how Jason's obsession, fueled by jealousy and rejection, had escalated into a violent fantasy that he executed in real life. The fact that he had been a teenager did not diminish the severity of the actions. Rather, it underscored how even youth could harbor dangerous obsession capable of lethal consequences. The defense, meanwhile, argued for leniency. They emphasized Jason's age and potential for rehabilitation, citing his lack of a prior criminal record and claiming that psychological intervention could prevent future offenses. They painted a portrait of a troubled adolescent whose emotional turmoil had escalated beyond his control. However, the overwhelming evidence of premeditation, careful manipulation, and sheer brutality undermined these claims. The jury would have to weigh the balance between age, psychological state, and the severity of the crime, and the decision carried immense weight, not just for Jason, but for the sense of justice in Kapunda. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all 3 counts of murder. Jason Downey had committed an act that shocked a community and defied comprehension, leaving no room for doubt in the eyes of the court. As the verdict was read, the courtroom was silent, punctuated only by the soft sobs of family members and the quiet murmur of reporters documenting the moment. For the victims' relatives, the verdict was both relief and anguish: relief that justice had been served, anguish at the irreparable loss of life. Sentencing followed in April 2012. The judge, acknowledging the severity of the crimes, imposed life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years. The sentence was considered both punitive and symbolic, reflecting the extreme brutality of the murders while adhering to the legal framework for a juvenile offender. The judge noted the calculated and obsessive nature of the attacks, the impact on the local community, and the enduring grief of the surviving family members. Jason, despite the sentence, showed no visible reaction, maintaining the same cold demeanor that had characterized his behavior throughout the trial. Following sentencing, attention turned to the aftermath of the murders for the surviving family members. Christopher Rowe, the eldest son, had been forced to confront a reality no one should face: the loss of his entire immediate family. In interviews, he spoke of profound grief, describing the months after the murders as a blur of pain, disbelief, and mourning. He retreated from public life, leaving Kapunda temporarily and taking time off work. When he eventually returned, he faced the challenge of rebuilding both his personal life and his professional endeavors. In honoring his family's legacy, Christopher made the decision to continue the family business. He renamed the carpet cleaning company from First Choice Carpet Cleaning to Rose Choice Carpet Cleaning, a tribute to his mother and a tangible way of preserving his family's memory. This act, while practical, also served as a symbolic gesture of resilience, showing that even after unimaginable tragedy, life could continue and the love and memory of the deceased could endure. For the community of Kapuya, the murders left a lingering sense of vulnerability. Parents became more cautious, neighbors more vigilant, and the perception of safety in a small town was forever altered. Local authorities initiated programs to educate the public on warning signs of obsession and domestic threats, hoping to prevent future tragedies. The case became a reference point in discussions about youth violence, obsession, and the capacity for seemingly ordinary individuals to commit extraordinary acts of cruelty. Jason Downey, meanwhile, began serving his sentence at the Moorland Juvenile Detention Center in South Australia. Reports indicated that he remained largely detached, interacting minimally with other inmates and showing little outward remorse. Psychologists working with him described a complex psychological profile, a combination of obsessive tendencies, emotional detachment, and a willingness to manipulate situations to his advantage. While the legal system provided for potential rehabilitation, Jason's attitude and past behavior left many skeptical about his capacity for genuine reform. Letters and communications from Jason after sentencing further illustrated the chilling nature of his character. He wrote to Chantel's family, expressing a forced apology that many perceived as insincere. Observers noted the lack of genuine emotion in his words, suggesting a person capable of understanding societal expectations without experiencing true remorse. For the Rowe family and their surviving son, these communications provided little solace, reinforcing the magnitude of the emotional devastation they had endured. Psychologists and criminologists later used the case as a study in obsessive adolescent behavior escalating to lethal violence. They highlighted the importance of early detection of obsessive tendencies, the potential for rejection or jealousy to become dangerous when combined with emotional immaturity, and the ways in which seemingly normal social interactions could mask darker intentions. For law enforcement, the case reinforced the critical role of forensic science, DNA analysis, and careful investigation in resolving crimes that might otherwise remain unsolved. As the years passed, Christopher Rowe continued to honor the memory of his family while rebuilding his own life. Tattoos bearing the names of Andrew, Rose, and Chantel served as a permanent tribute, a daily reminder of the family he had lost, but also a symbol of enduring love. The community, while forever marked by the events, slowly recovered, with the Rowe family's story serving as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of resilience in the face of tragedy. The Kapunda murders ultimately left a profound legacy. The brutality of the crime, the calculated actions of a young perpetrator, and the emotional aftermath for a grieving family highlighted the complexities of human behavior, the capacity for obsession to escalate into violence, and the long-term effects of trauma on survivors. For legal experts, psychologists, and the public, the case served as a stark reminder that danger can lurk where it is least expected, and that justice, while vital, cannot undo the pain of those left behind. In reflecting on the Rowe family murders, it is clear that no sentence can fully repair the damage done. Yet the combination of forensic diligence, investigative persistence, and the eventual legal resolution provided a measure of closure. Jason Downey remains incarcerated, a living embodiment of the consequences of unchecked obsession and violence. Meanwhile, Christopher Rowe continues to honor his family's memory, balancing grief with resilience and ensuring that the story of Andrew, Rose, and Chantel Rowe is not forgotten. The Kapunda case, with its layers of obsession, brutality, and community impact, stands as a grim but vital lesson. It reminds us that the most dangerous threats may not always come from strangers, that appearances can be deceiving, and that the consequences of jealousy, obsession, and rage can be devastatingly final. As the town remembers the Rowe family, their legacy lives on, not only in memory, but in the lessons their story imparts about human behavior, vigilance, and the enduring need for justice. In the quiet suburban town of Meadowbrook, nestled on the outskirts of St. Clair, Illinois, life moved slowly. The streets were lined with maples and oaks. Kids rode their bikes in the evenings, and neighbors waved as they passed. It was the kind of place where people felt safe leaving doors unlocked at night. For the Sanderson family, life seemed ordinary, but for most ordinary families, ordinary doesn't always last. Martin and Evelyn Sanderson were devoted parents, raising 2 young children in a house they had lovingly restored over the years. Martin, 32, worked as a logistics manager at a regional warehouse, balancing long hours with a quiet dedication to his family. Evelyn, 31, was a homemaker who kept the house immaculate and full of warmth. She organized the neighborhood book club, coordinated charity drives at the local church, and volunteered at the children's daycare. Their children, 12-year-old Sophie and 10-year-old Ben, were curious, bright, and full of life. The kind of kids who left fingerprints on everything, but left smiles behind wherever they went. By all accounts, the Sandersons were the kind of family that could be held up as a model of suburban stability. Neighbors admired them, teachers praised the children, and even casual acquaintances often commented on the family's warmth. Yet beneath the calm exterior of Meadowbrook, shadows were gathering that no one could see. It was January 19, 1987. A Tuesday that began like any other. Martin had taken the day off to finish some home projects, while Evelyn had planned to bake with Sophie and help Ben with his science project. Outside, the sky was overcast, the wind biting with a winter chill, but the Sandersons felt safe. They were home, together, and oblivious to the nightmare about to unfold. Unbeknownst to them, a man had been observing their home for weeks. Lucas Trent, 24, was an ex-convict recently released from prison with a criminal history that included burglary, assault, and possession of stolen property. His life had been chaotic, shaped by neglect and abandonment. Born in Springfield to a teenage mother who abandoned him before his 2nd birthday, Lucas spent much of his childhood in foster care, bouncing from home to home. By age 13, he had already been arrested for petty theft. By 16, he had experienced his first stint in juvenile detention for robbery. Lucas was highly intelligent, an IQ that hovered around 128, but his brilliance was overshadowed by a sense of entitlement and a lack of empathy. He had a talent for manipulation, reading people's vulnerabilities and using them to his advantage. He had been watching the Sanderson family for weeks, noting their routines, the times Martin left for work, when the children returned from school, and when Evelyn tended to her household chores. For him, they were not people, they were targets. That evening, Martin returned home after finishing some repairs in the garage. Sophie and Ben were upstairs finishing homework, and Evelyn was preparing dinner in the kitchen. The house was quiet, the faint hum of the heater the only sound. Then, without warning, the tranquility shattered. Lucas had forced a window open in the back, the cold metal scraping against the frame, and entered the house silently. He carried a duffel bag that contained a revolver, a few knives, and ropes he had brought specifically for control. When Evelyn first saw him, her initial reaction was disbelief. She froze for a split second, instinctively trying to shield the children. Lucas barked an order to stay still, his voice low but commanding. Panic surged through Evelyn's chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, thinking only of her children. He tied her and the children up with the ropes he had brought, working quickly, efficiently. He assured them it was a robbery, a temporary scare, but there was no mercy in his eyes, and his calmness was terrifying. Martin, hearing the commotion, entered the house, unaware of the full scope of the intruder's presence. When he saw Lucas with his family restrained, he reacted instinctively, rushing forward in an attempt to protect them. The struggle was brief but violent. Lucas, fearing for his plan, shot Martin once, then again, and struck him repeatedly with the butt of his gun. Evelyn and the children screamed in horror, watching their father fall. But even then, Evelyn tried to comfort Sophie and Ben, whispering to them that everything would be okay, even as her own fear threatened to consume her. The violence escalated. Lucas, his plan unraveling, realized he could not leave witnesses. He methodically turned the gun on Evelyn, then the children. He shot them quickly, efficiently, one by one, leaving the house in a horrific silence that would later stun investigators. After the murders, he ransacked the house for valuables, but surprisingly, the majority of items he found were left behind. It seemed the killing had been the primary motive, or perhaps his obsession with leaving no witnesses had overtaken any sense of rationality. Outside, the quiet suburban streets remained deceivingly calm. Neighbors had no idea of the carnage that had taken place just behind closed doors. It would be hours before anyone realized what had happened. A passerby eventually noticed the Sanderson family's car still parked in the driveway the next morning and reported the unusual quiet to local authorities. When officers arrived and entered the home, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Every room bore the marks of struggle. Blood was smeared across walls and furniture. The kitchen had splintered wooden chairs tipped over, plates shattered on the floor. Upstairs, Sophie and Ben's bedroom was similarly chaotic, their small hands and toys scattered amidst the evidence of the killer's rage. Officers immediately understood that this was no ordinary burglary. The brutality, the efficiency, and the complete lack of remorse indicated a perpetrator who was both calculated and deeply disturbed. Investigators began combing the neighborhood for leads. They interviewed neighbors, collected fingerprints, and reviewed any recent disturbances in the area. It wasn't long before they discovered that another home a few streets away had been broken into the night prior, but the occupants had escaped unharmed. The similarities between the two incidents, time of entry, forced windows, items stolen, began to paint a picture of a serial offender targeting the area. One critical lead came from a neighbor, Martha Livingston, who had seen a suspicious vehicle near the Sanderson residence the evening of the murders. It was an older, faded blue Chevrolet sedan, dented and missing a hubcap, parked idly on the street as if its driver was waiting for something or someone. That description, combined with the evidence from the earlier attempted burglary, helped narrow the list of potential suspects. Police soon focused on Lucas Trent. His criminal history, combined with his recent release and known associations in the area, made him a prime suspect. Lucas had a reputation for carefully planning his crimes, but also for being unpredictable when confronted. When authorities finally located him at a run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of Meadowbrook, he attempted to flee.
The ensuing chase ended with his arrest after he was cornered in a laundry room where he had attempted to hide. Lucas was taken into custody and questioned extensively. His calm, almost indifferent demeanor during interrogation unnerved detectives. He initially claimed he had only intended to burglarize the house and that someone else must have carried out the murders, but forensic evidence quickly dismantled his story. Fingerprints matched those found at the crime scene. Ballistics confirmed the gun used was the same one discovered in his possession. Bloodstains on clothing and shoes tied him directly to the murders. As the investigation unfolded, details emerged that painted a chilling portrait of Lucas's mindset. He had been meticulous in his surveillance of the Sanderson family, noting their habits and routines. He had entered the home quietly, fully prepared to control the family with ropes and weapons. Yet when confronted with unexpected resistance from Martin, his violence escalated, revealing both his impulsive rage and premeditated planning. Lucas Trent would eventually face trial for the quadruple homicide, his defense attempting to claim insanity due to his history of institutionalization as a juvenile. However, the overwhelming physical evidence, combined with witness testimony and his own incriminating statements, made a conviction nearly certain. By the time the trial began, the public was already fixated on the story, horrified by the brutality of a crime that had shattered what was supposed to be an idyllic suburban life. Throughout the legal proceedings, the victims' family members were vocal in their grief. Evelyn's sister, Marcia Halverson, became a central figure in advocating for justice. She spoke to the press about the Sanderson family's love, the tragedy of their untimely deaths, and the importance of remembering the victims rather than the perpetrator. The trial was as much a story about the lives lost as it was about the man who had ended them. Meadowbrook had been forever altered. The streets once thought safe became reminders of a family's final moments. The Sanderson story served as a chilling example of how evil can lurk in ordinary places and how quickly life can be transformed in a single night. After Lucas Trent's arrest, the small town of Meadowbrook was gripped with tension and disbelief. How could a place so calm, so ordinary, have harbored such violence? Residents who had once left their doors unlocked at night now double-checked every lock, whispered to neighbors about suspicious cars, and wondered if anyone they passed on the street could be hiding dark intentions. The Sanderson family's tragedy had shattered the illusion of safety, and while Lucas was behind bars, the community could not yet breathe easy. Law enforcement immediately prioritized building a rock-solid case against Lucas. Detectives combed through the Sanderson house, meticulously cataloging evidence that would later form the backbone of the prosecution. Ballistics reports confirmed that the revolver Lucas had in his duffel bag matched the bullets recovered from the victims. Blood typing further linked him to each member of the Sanderson family. The forensic team even recovered fibers from the rope and the gloves he had used to restrain the family, all of which matched items found in his apartment. It was a damning combination of physical evidence, witness testimony, and Lucas's own confessions that made the case almost airtight. Yet, Lucas did not make the process easy. From the moment he was taken into custody, he oscillated between indifference and cunning. He seemed calm when discussing his alibi, dismissive when confronted with the forensic evidence, and at times almost charming in his attempts to convince investigators that he had merely been a bystander, present at the scene but not the perpetrator. Authorities quickly realized that while Lucas was intelligent, his manipulation skills were no match for the layers of evidence collected. Debbie Callahan, a former friend and occasional accomplice, became a key witness. Lucas had lent her a faded blue Chevrolet, the same car seen lingering near the Sanderson residence. Initially hesitant to speak, Debbie eventually provided investigators with critical details. She recounted how Lucas had boasted about breaking into houses to fund his habits, how he carried a revolver with him at all times, and how he was obsessed with covering all tracks during his escapades. Most importantly, she confirmed seeing him with stolen items matching those reported missing from other burglaries, further establishing a pattern of criminal behavior.
The story of Lucas's upbringing became a focal point during the investigation. Born into neglect and shuffled between foster homes, he had learned early on that the world was a hostile place. Institutions like the St. Clair Children's Center shaped him into a survivor, but also instilled in him a sense of anger and resentment that festered over time. By his teenage years, he was already skilled at reading people, exploiting weaknesses, and using intimidation to get what he wanted. His intelligence, paired with a complete lack of empathy, made him an unpredictable and dangerous individual. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the boy Lucas had been with the man who had destroyed an entire family. It became clear that no matter how much background could explain his behavior, it could never excuse the horrors he had committed. Public meetings were held at the local community center, and clergy, neighbors, and law enforcement all weighed in on the lasting impact of such violence on Meadowbrook. Parents held their children closer, and local schools increased security, though nothing could erase the memory of what had happened at the Sanderson home. Lucas's trial became a media sensation. Cameras from local news outlets gathered outside the courthouse daily, capturing the tension, the mourners, and the grim atmosphere inside the building. Prosecutors focused on the sequence of events that led to the deaths of Martin, Evelyn, Sophie, and Ben, emphasizing both the premeditated and opportunistic elements of Lucas's actions. They presented the jury with meticulous timelines, forensic evidence, and witness statements, demonstrating that this was not a robbery gone wrong. It was a deliberate series of violent acts fueled by fear and impulse. Defense attorneys, on the other hand, tried to claim that Lucas suffered from severe psychological issues. They highlighted his turbulent childhood, time spent in institutions, and previous interactions with the criminal justice system to argue that he could not fully comprehend the gravity of his actions. Psychiatric evaluations were conducted, and while some experts suggested possible mental instability, the prosecution countered with evidence indicating lucidity and intent at every step of the crime. Testimony from law enforcement officers and neighbors painted a picture of a man who had planned and executed his actions with a disturbing level of control. Debbie Callahan's testimony proved particularly impactful. She described how Lucas had shown her the stolen items, how he posed for photographs with some of them, and how he tried to flaunt his crimes in an almost grotesque display of bravado. Her testimony helped jurors understand not just the mechanics of the crime, but the mindset behind it. Lucas's lack of remorse, combined with his desire to control and intimidate, became a central theme in the prosecution's argument. Over the course of several weeks, evidence continued to mount. The glove found in Lucas's apartment tested positive for traces of Martin Sanderson's blood. Fibers recovered from his clothing matched those found in the Sanderson home. Ballistics confirmed that the gun used in the killings belonged to Lucas. When combined with Debbie's account and other circumstantial evidence, suspicious sightings, vehicle registration records, and Lucas's own statements, the case against him seemed unassailable. During testimony, the defense attempted to cast doubt on the timeline, arguing that Lucas could not have been solely responsible for all aspects of the crime, but the prosecution methodically refuted these claims, showing how each act, from restraining the family to the final fatal shootings, was consistent with one perpetrator. Witnesses described seeing a blue Chevrolet in the area, confirming Debbie's account of borrowing the vehicle. Forensic timelines aligned with Lucas's known whereabouts, and patterns of prior burglaries demonstrated his escalating criminal behavior. The jury deliberated for days, reviewing reams of evidence and witness accounts. The weight of the Sanderson family's story, the love they had shared, the lives they had led, and the brutality they had endured hung heavily over the courtroom. Jurors were faced not only with the facts of the crime, but with the human cost. The prosecution urged them to consider the premeditation and callousness of Lucas's actions, while the defense pressed for consideration of his troubled upbringing and alleged mental instability. Ultimately, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Lucas Trent was found guilty on all counts: 4 counts of murder,
2 counts of armed robbery and 1 count of burglary. The verdict brought a mixture of relief and sorrow to Meadowbrook. Relief because justice had been served, sorrow because no verdict could bring back the Sanderson family. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered to mark the outcome. Some cried openly, others stood in silent reflection, and the community collectively acknowledged the void left by the deaths of Martin, Evelyn, Sophie, and Ben. Lucas Trent behind bars, convicted and sentenced, but the reverberations of his crime extended far beyond the courtroom. Meadowbrook was forever changed. Parents taught their children to be cautious, neighbors became vigilant, and the shadow of that one winter night lingered in the streets where laughter once echoed. While the trial had provided some closure, the memory of the Sanderson family, their warmth, their innocence, and their lives cut short, remained the true focus of the community's mourning. Even after Lucas Trent was sentenced, the town of Meadowbrook could not simply return to normal. While justice had technically been served, the void left by the Sanderson family was permanent. Friends and neighbors grappled with the sudden absence of Martin, Evelyn, Sophie, and Ben, and the stories of their lives, the family dinners, the bedtime stories, the laughter that once filled their home, became a quiet, painful echo in the community. Their home on Willow Creek Lane stood empty for months, a constant reminder of the night everything changed. Martin's brother, Philip Sanderson, took it upon himself to honor their memory. He worked tirelessly with the local community center to create a memorial scholarship in Martin and Evelyn's name, designed to help children from troubled households avoid the same fate that had befallen Lucas Trent. Every year, a new student would receive funding to attend summer programs focused on arts, education, or sports. It was Philip's way of creating some good from the tragedy, ensuring that the Sandersons' legacy lived on in lives touched by opportunity rather than violence. Evelyn's sister, Marcia Harlow, became an advocate for victims' families across the state. She spoke openly about the emotional toll of violent crime, the struggle to navigate the legal system, and the importance of community support. Marcia often recalled the final moments of the Sandersons' lives, not to sensationalize the crime, but to remind others that behind every headline are real people, real families, and real grief. Through her advocacy, she helped pass local legislation that provided additional counseling and financial assistance to families affected by violent crime. Meanwhile, Lucas Trent's appeals dragged on for decades. He exhausted every legal loophole, argued for mental health considerations, and delayed his execution as long as possible. Over the years, his case became a study in the complexities of the American justice system. Lawyers debated whether he had genuinely suffered from a psychological disorder at the time of the murders, or if he had feigned illness to avoid responsibility. Psychiatric evaluations continued into the 1990s and early 2000s, with conflicting reports and expert testimony fueling years of legal maneuvering. Yet no amount of paperwork or courtroom wrangling could erase what he had done. In private, Lucas admitted to a few people over the years that he acted with full awareness during the murders, claiming that his impulsive nature and fear of getting caught had driven him to commit unspeakable acts. These admissions never reached the courtroom, but were documented by law enforcement and legal teams, further reinforcing the inevitability of his eventual execution. Despite his intelligence and cunning, Lucas could not escape the consequences of the lives he had destroyed. By the early 2000s, his appeals had run out. On a cold March night in 2005, the state of Newland carried out Lucas Trent's execution. He requested no spiritual advisor and no last-minute appeals. His final meal consisted of steak, mashed potatoes, and chocolate cake, a starkly ordinary meal for someone whose actions had been anything but ordinary. His final words were brief: "I hope some good can come from the lives I took." While authorities recorded this statement, many in Meadowbrook focused not on Lucas's final moments, but on the memories of the Sanderson family he had extinguished.
For the extended Sanderson family, the execution was a bittersweet milestone. There was relief that the legal process had concluded, but no sense of joy. The emotional scars left by that January night in 1980 ran deep. Philip and Marcia continued their advocacy work, while family friends often gathered to share memories of the Sandersons. Each recollection, whether about Martin teaching Ben how to ride a bike or Evelyn baking cookies for Sophie, served as a reminder that their lives, though tragically cut short, had meaning. Over time, the community also began to heal. Meadowbrook, once overshadowed by fear, rebuilt a sense of trust. Neighborhood watch programs were established, school safety protocols improved, and residents became more vigilant. But these measures, while practical, could never fully erase the collective trauma. Local writers and historians documented the Sanderson story in small publications and town records, ensuring that the family's memory was preserved, not as victims, but as individuals whose lives had been full and meaningful. Sophie and Ben Sanderson would have grown into adults, likely raising families of their own. Martin and Evelyn would have become grandparents, watching their children navigate life and celebrating milestones together. In imagining these scenarios, the Sanderson family's surviving relatives found small comfort. They could honor what might have been, even as they acknowledged the tragic reality. Memorial events, birthday remembrances, and scholarship programs became the family's way of keeping their presence alive in Meadowbrook. Additionally, the case became a point of study for law enforcement and criminal psychology. Lucas Trent's behavior, his manipulation, planning, and eventual confession provided insight into criminal minds, the dangers of untreated behavioral disorders, and the consequences of a troubled upbringing. While some analyzed him as a subject of study, the broader lesson remained the same. Crimes like these are never just statistics. Behind every case file are real lives, real love, and real loss. One of the most enduring lessons from the Sanderson tragedy was the power of resilience. Despite the horror and grief, their family and community refused to let the violence define them entirely. Memorials, scholarships, and advocacy work ensured that the Sanderson story was remembered for the light they had brought into the world, rather than solely for the darkness that ended their lives. Meadowbrook slowly became a symbol of remembrance and recovery, a town scarred but not defeated, mourning but committed to creating positive change. Even decades later, when residents walk past the old Sanderson home, now renovated and occupied by a new family, they recall Martin teaching Ben to play catch in the yard, Evelyn's laughter ringing in the kitchen, and the warmth of a home filled with love. The story is told to children in whispers, not to terrify, but to teach caution and empathy, and to instill the understanding that families like the Sandersons are treasures worth protecting. Ultimately, the story of Lucas Trent and the Sanderson family serves as a somber reminder of human vulnerability, the consequences of crime, and the lasting impact on victims' families and communities. While the perpetrator's life ended in execution, the real legacy belongs to those he destroyed, the Sandersons, and the lives they touched while they were here. Their story, preserved in memories, scholarships, and community efforts, continues to remind Meadowbrook that even in the darkest moments, love, compassion, and resilience endure. Even as the years pass, Meadowbrook holds space for the Sanderson family, not in fear, but in reverence. Martin, Evelyn, Sophie, and Ben remain at the center of the town's collective memory, proof that while evil may alter lives in an instant, the positive impact of love, kindness, and family can echo through generations. Their story stands as a tribute to the lives they led, the joy they shared, and the hope that even after tragedy, communities can come together to honor the memory of those lost, ensuring that their legacy never fades.